back. We're so glad you guys are back for the Generation Next show.
We are so excited to have you all tune in to this extremely amazing show with Joel. We are actually going to be having a couple things happening during the show. Today, I'm actually filling in for my main man, Mr. Bruce. So I'm going to be hosting the show as well, doing some communication behind the scenes on our live platform while Joel is getting interviewed. And so we have a powerful conversation today with Joel. He is a legend. He is a leader. He's a powerful man of God that we are so excited to have on. Joel, thanks so much for tuning in, bro.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be so great. We're so glad you guys are all back. If you see Aaron looking off to the side a little bit, he's not just randomly gazing out the window, but actually he's looking at his computer because he wants to interact with your chat. Usually Bruce is the one saying, hey, welcoming you all in, but Aaron gets to do that today. So please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. What's your role? What are you passionate about? And what's maybe your reason for tuning into a conversation like this? We would love to know. If this is your first time here to the Generation Next show, we just want to say welcome. We're so glad that you are here. We are your hosts, so we are here every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time to host these conversations, a place for us to have real discussions on what it's like to do ministry to the next generation right now in a year like 2022. And what we know is true is that there are statistics coming out every single day that seem to tell us that Gen Z is leaving the church, that Gen Z is disinterested in what we have to offer, that they don't see very much value in what the American church is, or even really in who Jesus is. And so because of that, we are saying, if that's true, if that's happening, then we're going to be even more intentional to have conversations, to build strategy, to share best practices, to share inspiration, to remind ourselves that there are intentional ways that we can fight against what the enemy is trying to do in Gen Z. And we can believe that the next generation is going to come back to the church and to Jesus. And the reality is that is happening around the world. There are stories, there are places where the next generation is hungry to know Jesus, where local pastors, local leaders, local disciplers are seeing the next generation come back. And we're trying to highlight some of those stories and talk to the people on the grounds that we can really learn what's working in other places, that we too can replicate that. So if you have questions throughout this discussion, we want you to drop them in the chat, because we want to hear, we want to answer your questions. We want this time to really serve you. And again, remember, introduce yourself, because this is a community, a community of leaders who are intentionally saying, I want to lean into this conversation. I care deeply about the next generation. So introduce yourself, share about why you're here and who you are and where you're from. We're going to jump into our conversation today because Aaron and I feel so grateful and so excited to have an amazing friend, an incredible leader, and really an expert in all things next gen here with us today. We have our friend Joel Firebaugh, as we said, and Joel is a pastor, and he has served in student ministry for over a decade. Incredible. That's a lot of experience.
Long time.
I know. And he's currently the director of a student ministry at Crossroads, which is a large multi-site church in Cincinnati, Ohio. He has a passion to help the next generation take next steps in their faith with the journey with Jesus. Joel is motivated to see the next generation come to know Jesus. In our conversations with him, when we get to hang out with Joel, man, this guy deeply wants the next generation to know Jesus. It motivates what he does, and that's and he's showing it. He's proven it in the way that he is investing in the next generation. So, Joel, I'm so glad you're here. We have so much to learn from you. So many questions. This is gonna be so fun.
And if you're listening, don't sleep on Cincinnati. If you ever want to come visit, it's a hidden gem of a city. So it's great.
Really, honestly, I was there in Cincinnati 3 or 4 years ago, and I was impressed. I thought, okay, I mean, you have that Riverwalk area, you have like I mean,
Come
some
on.
tennis. I'm a tennis person, so we went to the Cincinnati Open. So
No big
I
deal.
I thought Cincinnati was pretty
dropping that.
good. Yeah.
I could hype it up even better than that we had tennis, but it's great. It's a great city. You can come out later. I'll give you everyone listening to my Instagram. And if you want to come out to Cincinnati, it's great.
Yes.
So
I love that.
thanks
It's
for having me.
amazing.
I care a lot about the next generation, and my heart specifically breaks for what the local church is doing with the next generation. And so there's plenty of organizations out there doing and trying to impact this generation that is hurting. I mean, I'll give you research later, but for today's conversation, it's like how do you build an effective student ministry within the context of a local church? So I'm excited to chat.
And
So
I'm sure
excited.
so many people are tuning in because maybe they just got hired on as a youth pastor and they're in the deep end and they have no idea what they're doing. Or maybe they're just the youngest person on staff. And so when they said they need to start a youth group, they just all looked at the young person and thought, well, you probably know what you're doing, right? Or maybe even there are some people on here who have been in youth ministry for a really long time. And the things that was always working 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is just not working anymore. And they're asking the question, what do I do now? Like, why isn't it working to reach this generation that in a way that it reached generations in the past, right? And so, or maybe even we have some volunteers who are volunteers in our youth ministry, and they're seeing that what's happening is not working. And they're trying to think, can I bring some wisdom back to my youth pastor to help? So no matter where they're at, this is going to be a really relevant conversation. Let's just start, Joel, by sharing, you have, over a decade of experience in youth ministry. Share a little bit about your journey through youth ministry, where it's taken you.
Yeah, I mean, I started out at a church plant while I was in college, my student ministry, where I ran the student ministry, but I mean, it was like for gas cards, right? And then I've spent from there and from out of seminary, I spent most of my life though in the multi-site megachurch world. Wow. So not that this would not apply other places, but if anybody out there, if their church is talking about going multi-site, I've heard it said a ton of times, nobody goes multi-site for student ministry. And true, it's complicated, it's messy, but I do believe there are some benefits that your church could benefit from in student ministry even, and like being on a team and other parts. So at the end, I'm telling you, contact me. If your church is a multi-site church, I would love to chat, but I think this will be relevant to anyone. So was in Michigan at a multi-site church called 242. We had sites all over Michigan, and now I'm here in Cincinnati. We got sites all over Kentucky and Ohio. Wow. And I work, so in Michigan, I got to build it from the ground up. That was a blast. I've been in any role you can think of, from middle school pastor there to leading the team. Wow. But here I just oversee the team. We got 18 youth pastors, and it's a blast.
Wow.
Amazing.
A lot of youth pastors.
Amazing.
My team is great. If they're listening, it's a great team. I'm blessed to have them. So
love that.
Man, that's awesome. Joel, it's really cool that you've had so much experience, like not only in Michigan, but where you're at today. It's awesome to know that when you're talking to a leader across the screen or in person, what I love about you, Joel, is you're a leader that is infectious. Your personality is contagious. You love the next generation. Every time I get to know you, have conversations around you, I feel like, and this is a modern day hype session for you right now, but in all reality, Joel, every time I've had a conversation with you, I feel like I leave inspired. I feel like I leave like, man, that guy gives me so much joy. And I can tell that you oversee youth ministry. And so what's really cool about your leadership and your personality is that you balance like a lot of things in ministry. You wear a lot of different hats. And then you're also balancing like multi-site. And so I would love to learn from you, like, what are you learning within youth ministry to build an effective youth ministry? What does that look like in today's culture when you're reaching like thousands of young people for Jesus?
Yeah.
Great. One, it is cool. It's a privilege because you guys are friends. I mean, this is fun. Like, we get to just hang out. And so I hope if you listen, you learn something, but worst case, you got to witness some friends hanging out. So here's what I would say is somebody out here needs to hear this right now, which is you can't do it all. You just can't. I know your senior pastor may want you to, your direct report may want you to, your manager may want you to. You can't do it all. So the only way to build an effective student ministry is to learn that early and then start reproducing yourself.
Wow.
And some would even call it biblical. And we've talked about a lot. If you listen to this podcast, you have heard Hannah and Aaron say that we don't have a next gen problem, we have a discipleship problem. That's their quote, not mine, but I use it frequently and quote them. And so the problem is, the generation above this generation didn't disciple. So we've learned, probably if you listen to this and you're in the millennial age, you haven't been taught or maybe modeled what it looked like to disciple. So you stepped into student ministry and said, I'm going to do this all myself. And but to actually take people alongside of you, that I would argue could be the next generation, even if you're at a smaller church or site, will be huge. Growing Young calls that keychain leadership, but just getting people around you, handing real load bearing stuff off.
Yes.
In your head, they won't do it as good as you're doing it, but I'm telling you, it's step -2 to building an effective student ministry. So, but beyond that though, I have, and we'll start this conversation. So maybe you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I got that part down. Like I'm building this team, and many of you that will have to be volunteers. And you would, if you're brand new student ministry, you're going to feel guilty asking people to do all this stuff. But the truth is you will start to see these people actually find purpose in it, and you're going to see volunteers changed, and you're going to just start realizing like you're honoring God by asking people to do this stuff, and you're giving kingdom-minded purpose to these people. So, but we decided here at Crossroads, I've been here 9 months at this church, so not long. So, and we had to build.
You're a legend there already.
Thanks, buddy. So we had to build something from the ground up. So phase 1 was research mode. So I'm going to give you some of the research we did, which was on the local, it was Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky teenagers. Will it relate to you? Maybe, I don't know.
Awesome.
We got an insights team here at Crossroads on our staff that goes and they went and did a multi-month survey.
Right.
I mean, lawyers involved to get like actual, not just Gen Z through 24, like we did, the survey was 11 to 18 year olds.
Wow.
And
very cool.
And what do they need? Because if we're trying to give them something, like if we're trying to put something on for them, but missing what they need, then we're missing the point altogether. So we know we have the best product, right? We know we have the gospel of Jesus to give, but like if we're trying to solve problems that this generation needed a decade ago, then it's never going to work. So I will read some of this. And I'll do it in questions.
Yo, this is about to be good,
right?
Get out your notepad.
It might be.
We'll
see. I think it's great
to see the recording of this. This is so awesome. Okay, let's go.
All right, so I'm gonna start with a question for the first piece of data. Hannah and Aaron, do you think Gen Z likes big parties or small gatherings better?
I would say small gatherings.
I'd say small gatherings, but they love to be where their friends are.
Yeah, that's true.
So in at least our data we got back, 68% said they prefer a small gathering, which sounds high. But what our insights team said is this is nothing new. So that puts 32% that would prefer large gatherings.
Sure.
So think of a high school football game. Yeah, about 32% of the school is going to be there. So I would say for me, the large gathering is easy. That's something that's a skill I've crafted over the last year. What's going to be really hard is 68% of the people have just told me that they would rather a small gathering. And so for us, like we're going down that path of building healthy small group culture where small group pastors are the youth, or small group leaders are the youth pastors. So these are volunteers over students, because that's going to be way more effective to 68% of the people. Now we're still we're creatures of overcorrection, right? So we're still keeping the large gatherings that is affecting the 32%. We're not cutting those. Our camp is coming up and we do these large scale events and it gets people that would go to that. But then we're figuring out small groups and sending them so that they can specifically do what I mentioned earlier, solve this discipleship problem. It's us pouring into leaders who are pouring into students. And I might not know every student's name. I don't know every student's name. and if you're a youth pastor, you might need to hear this, but every student's name will be known by someone. And that's what.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys can tell me if this happened with you. I remember, so I just grew up at such a small church. I had a great student ministry experience. And when I went into student ministry, I expected like, I'm gonna get a 12 passenger van, like we go free bowling, basically, like,
Roll out.
And when my heart started to break for lost students, so the students not in our buildings, but the ones walking schools and that I see at the mall that are not in our ministry, I realized like, oh gosh, like that vision I grew up in is too small. Like I'm limiting them to a 12 passenger van. And I had to like mourn a loss of like, shoot, like I'm way more of like a principal now than a teacher. Like I have teachers that are like, I don't know. Have you guys you guys are high capacity leaders with Gen Z. Have you been there? Give me some tips on how we stay and the people listening, how youth pastors stay involved though still then. How do you stay relevant? How do you make sure students, like you're getting skin to skin shoulder touches with students so you know like what they actually need, yet are leading at a high capacity?
I mean, I believe you do this so well. It is such an interesting experience, right? That, we were just at a gathering of young adult pastors over the last few days, and we were talking about this idea of discipleship. And, over and over, everyone's saying, I don't disciple our young adults. Even though I'm the young adult pastor, I disciple a group of 20 leaders, 12 leaders who are discipling my young adults, my students. And the weird thing is it feels so wrong, right? But when I was not a youth pastor, so when I was an 18-year-old volunteer in a youth ministry, I was a small group leader. And I'm really grateful that even though it was a very small youth group, I mean, I was a small group, or it was a youth group where the youth pastor had just left. We've all been a part of those, right? Like the youth pastor just, like literally he was there for like 9 months and he burnt out. It was not a beautiful transition. It was not we're sending him off in a place of glory. It was he's there 1 week, he's gone the next, and now we're here to pick up the pieces. And so there's about maybe 20 kids coming to this youth group, right? And so and they were all middle school, high school, all in one place. We were in this little church basement, and our church was portable, so we didn't even have a place to host them. And it was a not nice church basement, not at all. But they asked me to lead the middle school girls because I was 18. So that's really the only option. I mean, otherwise I would have been basically leading my peers.
Wow.
So I started to lead a small group for middle school girls. And the cool thing is that the middle school girls kept coming back. And although the numbers of other groups would fluctuate, the middle school girls came back again and again and again. And it's definitely not because I was a good youth, like small group leader. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a good youth group experience. So I had never experienced a good small group leader. So I didn't know what to do, but I would read books. I would start listening to podcasts. I would start going to conferences about what it meant to be a good small group leader. And they would say things like, hey, go to your people's sports games. And so I think, okay, well, my girls are like cheerleaders. So I guess I'll go to the football game and sit with their mom and be this 18-year-old that just, and then I'll take them out for lunch. And so I was just trying to figure it out. And turns out those middle school girls, I would be their leader for the next 8 years. I walked them all the way through when they were juniors and seniors in high school. They were the junior bridesmaids in our wedding. And it wasn't because I was an amazing small group leader. It was because the model for the youth group was the youth pastor was not there even to invest in anybody. There was no youth pastor. So it had to be us, the volunteers, the small group leaders with normal lives that had to find out time to invest. And I know now that the youth group has grown since I've left and all that, I mean, and I think about you, like, there's no way, Joel, you could show up at 1,000 kids football games. Like there's just no way, but you can invest in leaders who invest in leaders who invest in leaders who show up at the games. And so I think that model is so important.
Yeah. Well, I grew up. Oh, go ahead, Aaron. I was just going to say the word youth sponsors. And if you still call it, that's okay. But the concept was like, you just stood in the back really creepy. And what you're saying, Hannah, like is an actual leader. Like you're not just there to stand. And so Aaron, hit me with your experience. Sorry, I cut you off, man.
Well, I just think it's funny that we're supposed to interview you and you're interviewing us. But
I'm just trying to learn, man. We're just talking.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is
funny.
You talked about a little bit about relevancy, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that Han and I talk a ton about when it comes down to reaching the next generation is this idea of just being adjustable, like having adjustable leadership. And so I feel like in my seasons of youth ministry or being within youth ministry or leading youth ministry, I have found that either leaders above me or leaders below me don't feel like we're flexible enough to actually pivot, change, even personal things that we care about. Like I'm talking about like basic things. I'm not, when Jesus says like some people take this too far, but like be all things to all people, right? But what I do feel like within youth ministry, it is very key to be relevant by being adjustable. And so I feel like when someone has a narrative, like within a relationship of like, hey, Joel, like, could you please do this? Or, hey, Joel, when you leave me, could you please do this? Or, hey, like within our marriage, could you just treat me like this? And when we don't adjust to that, we actually see a breakdown start happening. Yeah. And so what I feel like to really be relevant, it needs to cause us as leaders, from senior leaders above us to people that we're leading or people that we're discipling. How do I become what you need me to be for you? Right. And I think that's one way that we can go to effective youth ministries is by saying, I need to bring adjustability within everything I do, from the way like maybe I dress to the way I talk, to the way I communicate, to the way I love, to the way I disciple, to the way I lead. So that's like one thing I would share. So
there's a new term, because Aaron's dead on. Relevant, correct, which I'll explain, but not cool. You do not need to be cool to be in student ministry. Okay. I promise you. I promise you I am not cool to any of my students. No one can be cooler to a high schooler than a high schooler. Okay. Like, no one can. You got a mustache, dude. You are cool. He looks like Justin Bieber, and Justin Bieber was just in Cincinnati yesterday, and so I looked for him. I didn't see him.
Should I put that in?
Put that in the group chat. Yeah. No. So there's a phrase out there. I think it's coined by Orange, Think Orange, which says warm is the new cool. Yeah. And it's like my favorite phrase, because you don't need to be cool to be relevant. Just be warm. In fact, being relevant, oftentimes to know what's going on in their culture, you ask them. That's warm. Like, hey, what are the kids at school like? Like what? My favorite icebreaker student with the student, I'll say, what percent of your school you think vapes? Like, I don't, and they like love to talk about it. Like just, and they'll tell you if they are or not. Yeah. Like, and, but does that mean I need to pick up vaping to be relevant? Oh, like you just need to ask them like these questions. You need to be warm. And so for me, that means I need to be around students. So I'm not contradicting myself here, but it's going to sound like it. You need to reproduce yourself out of leading students, and you need to get around students. So for me, that's just a small group. At my last church, I had 3 dudes I was just pouring into, but now have a program we're launching called an influencer program. It's just a trade-off for student leaders. That's a new word for leaders, so they're student influencers. And they're our sharpest students, and those are the ones like our central team that is over adults. They're mandated to go, or going to be mandated to go be at a site with their influencer program to make sure they're shoulder to shoulder with students and understanding what they're going through, if they're going to be the ones writing content and that kind of stuff. So, be warm.
Let's break that down real quick.
Okay, yeah.
Because that's amazing. And I feel like that's really practical. And I love being practical here. Let's say there's a youth pastor. Okay, he has 50 students. Okay.
Great.
Or let's say there's a youth pastor and she has, 25 students. Maybe one guy has 100. Like these are not, let's just start small. Okay. How would they do this? So you say you have student influencers and you're spending time with them and then you're also multiplying leaders. Like, let's break down the org chart almost. Help us envision, how do we do this in our youth ministry tomorrow?
Let's do it. You could do it tomorrow. Well, you do need to recruit leaders, and they don't need to be cool. I'm gonna keep emphasizing. Yeah. And you've probably been trained on this, the I see in you conversation. You know, you're not asking of them, you see something in them. Okay, great. Let's say you're sitting there ready to go. You got some leaders, they just don't have the vision yet. They're just youth sponsors at this point. And again, it's not the term, you can keep the term. It's just the concept that I experienced, which was you come, stand there, you do everything. You set up, you tear down, whatever. So one way to do this, starting with the leaders, is to actually not have leaders do everything. I know it sounds crazy, but put them as small group leaders. So they are over a small group of students and they're their pastor. And then create a whole, and their standards. So at my last church, you had to commit to 4 years of leading. When you signed up. So if you came in as a 9th grader, you were committing through their senior year. And you're sitting there maybe listening and going, we couldn't do that at our church. I promise you, it closes the back door is what it does. So maybe your front door cracks less a little bit, you get less in, but you're losing less leaders every year. In fact,
and
you should
these
be
are
zero.
actual like adult leaders who report into the students, or these are the student leaders? These are adults.
These are adult leaders, but they could absolutely be students, but they are held to the same standard.
Got it.
Honestly, we probably have equal amount, especially as you talk about our middle school ministry, of high schoolers and adults that are small leaders.
That's cool.
But high schoolers commit to 4 years. So, or at least the end of their age group. So if they are a junior, I would put them then with 7th graders and they would commit through 8th grade. But so my last church, our middle school program was on Friday nights, like full service band, small groups. And if you were a high schooler, you had to commit for your Friday nights for 4 years. And we had we had hundreds probably do it and miss football games for 4 years to come be. So, I mean, the standards are high and you put students there, but you don't give them some watered down student expectation.
Right.
Like, either they're a leader and they go to the expectation, or you say, hey, and that's where this other part comes in. So you have that role, which is really high. Then you have another set of options. We just call it volunteering, not leading, that anyone can do. High schoolers that do want to be flaky, or adults that do. And this is more set up, tear down, coffee team, like welcome team, all this stuff. A lot of churches call it first impressions. And so that's been huge for us. A high standard of, hey, you are, my sell for the high standard is what Hannah said. Hey, do you want to be in these students' wedding? Like I literally say that. Do you want to be in their wedding? That's what we're talking about. And I get that they're in 7th grade, but like, do you want to, like, that's this standard. And then there's this volunteer one. And here's what we see. Here's the beauty if you're interested in trying this out. And this is, a lot of churches do this. You get one spouse a lot of times here that wants to be a small group leader, and her husband or wife doesn't want that kind of commitment. But when they can come, they can still show up, do ministry with their spouse, but just set up, tear down, welcome, be on this whole separate team. And instead of being like, oh, if you can't do this, or you're not at a level of, our leadership expectations, then you're both out, or you can't spend every Sunday evening with your spouse or Friday night, so it's been really cool. Okay. So that's the simplified, I'm going quick, but that's the simplified version of the leadership side.
Yeah.
So I joke, I tell all my youth pastors that they're principals and they're recruiting the teachers. Okay. So that's what that is. And now I have to even more. Now I call myself a superintendent. Like, how lame is that? I have principals that have leaders, teachers, that have students. So how do I get involved with students? That's then the second question. And it takes work. Like, it really does. It takes extra night of the week. Everybody knows students aren't free till like 6 p.m. In fact, their most available time is when mom and dad go to bed. It's digital though, and it's like 10 to midnight, and you probably should not be hanging out with them then. But like, that's when they're binging Friends or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, man, I don't want to leave work at 6 and then go do 2 hours of hanging with students. But every time I do, I'm so happy I did.
Yeah.
And So for us, we created a student leadership program, and it's in the mix of being created.
Okay.
You might have one. Ours is for just high schoolers, and I will be at one of our campuses, just that campus, leading that group.
Okay.
So it still puts me like in real conversations with probably our most mature students who will have these conversations with us as we lead from up here. But it doesn't limit my leadership and okay, I can only have a youth group the size of people I can know their names or go to a sporting event.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
That's the brief version. And I know plenty of people listening right now are doing the same thing. And
great.
Keep it up.
Wow, that's so good.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, go for it.
No, that's great.
Yeah, I think what's really cool is what you talked about is like this pipeline approach, and also legacy. I feel like to really see a youth ministry thrive, we have to think about 10, 20 years in advance. Like, where do we want these young leaders to be, to go? Where do we want them to lead? Do we want to raise up leaders that are even leading our own ministries,
Right.
And so I really appreciate the whole wedding aspect of how do we integrate our lives with their life.
Yes.
And so what are some, Joel, I'm curious, what are some struggles that you're finding when it comes down to
none, right?
Yeah. The next generation, feeding them, just maybe some practical things that you're learning in your context because you're multi-site, but obviously you oversee a lot of different campuses. And so what are just some struggles that maybe you're finding? We would love to learn from you in that.
Yeah, let me read off some more of these stats to lead into that. And I'll rapid fire them, but we found out, at least in our circles, 2 in 3 males don't have a deep relationship or friendship. 3 out of 4 people, just in general in Gen Z, don't have a friend they would feel safe enough to talk about God or faith with. We found out that only 1 in 3 of our survey described their life positively. And 41% of the people that took our survey, 41% met criteria for an anxiety or depressive disorder.
Wow.
So our data was basically concluded in this line right here. If you can find a student, a friend, you've won them. If you can get them a connection, like that's how you grow a healthy student ministry, or at least the small group side of it.
That's powerful.
So you can do the big event stuff and you can get 32%, but for the 68%, you're going to need to basically find them connections. And when I came in 9 months ago, we had a sponsor culture of leaders. They're there to serve, they're there to reprimand maybe, or there to babysit, or they're not there to invest and form a connection. So every church is different. For us, I don't even know if I should say it. For us, we are actually lenient on hey, be less of a reprimander. You're their leader, so lead them, take their phone, whatever. But play the long game. Over making sure that they were good that day. If they acted out that day, go get coffee with them that week and find out what's really going on. Don't reprimand and then see them the next Sunday.
That's so
good. That's you have to struggles. So that's a shift in culture. So we've had leaders leave, we've had leaders not open to that, we've had leaders trying to change, building our small group culture here has been incredibly difficult, and it's nowhere near where we want it to be yet. So because it's not just the program I just mentioned, the philosophy can be done overnight. The culture, it's going to take years.
Wow. So good. I love that you said that, Joel, because I remember in our small group that I led with my girls, we were always the loudest group, and you would have other leaders be like, can you guys please go to another part of the building because our groups are distracted? And I would be like, sure, because I'm not going to tell them when they're loudly talking over each other, trying to tell me about their week and joking with each other and building camaraderie. I'm not going to, I very rarely
sit and reprimand. Yeah.
Right. I would very rarely say, guys stopping to actually answer the questions now, because they were organically talking. They were sharing. I mean, most weeks we'd get to small group and they'd say, okay, this week, can we talk about like the fact that I just had this boy ask me out and I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Like they would have no context if there was like a list of questions you were supposed to get through. They just saw somebody that was willing to listen and they wanted to maximize that. And so I love, like, what if we took back the policies and the procedures and said, what does the people in front of me actually need? But we only know that if we're really pastoring them in their lives.
And I think there's like a huge difference that I don't think we talk enough about is parenting versus pastoring.
Yes.
And some pastors want to be everyone's parents.
Right.
And I just think it's so interesting in today's society with leading the next generation and playing that long-term game is like pastoring is defending, like to defend your flock, to leave the 99 for the one, to advocate for your heart, to advocate for what you're going through and to meet you in your pain and just sit there with you, ask great questions, and lead you in the ways of Jesus. But I think sometimes when things happen, when we look at young adults or the next generation, we're like, man, we've been pastoring them for 10 years and we've been their friend and now they made a poor life choice. So now I have to parent, and that's not our job. And that's why I think we as youth ministry leaders or next gen leaders, like we have to be people that are proximate enough to the parents of the actual students that we lead. So like we don't play a role that we were not supposed to play.
Right.
And so I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well, Joel.
There's a lot in there. I got a lot on it. So there's a third category between sponsors and small group leaders, and these are not real terms. Like I'm making these up, but I use them. Is a discussion leader. There's a discussion leader and a small group leader. Those are different things. So a discussion leader says what Hannah, and at least my definition of them. You might have different terms or different concepts, but discussion leader says, no, we can't talk about this boy or whatever you brought up. What did the pastor say about Matthew chapter 4? Or, like just gets like your goal is to lead a discussion.
That's so it right there.
Right. And then the small group leader's goal is to change their life, like pastor them, see them through hard times. Like, so my wife, like you, Hannah, she walked her girls from 7th grade through senior year of high school. And we've picked them up drunk from parties, high from stuff. Like we have, and we do legally have to tell their parents, and there's that part of it, but there was no, like, I can't believe, like she became a safe person of, she was who you called, when that happened. And, in our scenario, everyone's different. They didn't need to hear that. Some students probably do need a kick in the butt, but like they would come crying the next week, just in grief and sorrow. And she would be there as a pastor, even though she's the volunteer. She had a different job. She's their small group leader to be there for them. So lots more on that. I forget, you asked some sort of question about something. Oh, no. Parents. Yes. This does depend on culture. So we have sites that are in wealthy suburbs and we have sites that are in the city. We call our campuses sites, by the way. So if you hear me say that. And so, and a lot of times these suburban things, depending on the culture of your church, have these very invested parents. The term used to be helicopter parent, and you need to partner with them. Like they are in their home, you get them an hour a week, they get hundreds. And strategies with that. But there's other people who don't have parents, and you can't assume or have parents that you actually don't want to be their spiritual leader. And so it really is a messy situation that you just have to spend time. And that would be another one that I would say, if you said, like, what are you guys struggling with right now? Is we have no idea. Like, how do you be both? We do know Orange again has some great parent Q stuff and resources that you don't have to reinvent yourself that we utilize, but that we have not even scratched the surface on parents. But you hit that well. Like it is important, and we're not their parents, but how do we be their mentors?
I love it.
That's right. I love that. We probably have time for about one more question. If there's any questions you all want to hear from Joel as well, we can try and put those in. So drop those in the chat. But Joel, we talked about so many really amazing things. I can't believe how fast this has gone. This is so practical, so valuable. Your studies are so amazing, and they're so true, and they're so evident in this generation. And I think everyone listening is convinced, okay, we need small group leaders who are pastors. Like we do need them to be fostering this pastoral relationship with their students. But as you also mentioned, that's a culture shift. And probably one of the hardest parts of being a leader is shifting culture. I mean, it's just so hard. So how do we start? I mean, is this okay, we're getting all our small groups, leaders together at my house, and I'm telling them, start showing up at the football game. Is this a book that you pass out? Like, how do you start to shift that culture?
Culture shifts begin with vision. And so in the last 2 years, I have heard and read, I wish I could quote where, but so many times that we as a culture have shifted about 10 years, sped up. I mean, think about, like, my grandpa does his Sunday school on Zoom. I never thought I would live to see that world, but it happened in 2 years of COVID. And it's not like he's a hip grandpa. Like, we shifted that much, okay? So your leaders need to hear that. They need to hear, they're not reading student ministry books and in the world of students, like, they need to hear that this is literally the same students that you saw 2 years ago. They're different. Like, they're 10 years different. And they need to hear that vision. And then they need to probably hear some of this data would be around the vision, and then reminded this generation is they're being coined more and more the fighter generation. Like, they are fighters. They're going to change this world, and they're going to fight for something. They're going to fight for racial reconciliation. They're going to fight for equality. They're going to fight. If we can get them fighting for the gospel, that's where revival comes in. Like, they will change this place. And so to get a group of leaders in the room, basically say all this and say, so I do think it would be a leader vision night of some sort, but to say, don't you want to not spend your Sunday nights coming in, setting up chairs, playing 9 square and leaving? Like, don't you want to be a part of a modern day revival, which I believe is coming and happening through this generation? And the ones that say no, that's called trimming the fat. Like, I mean, you will lose some. And the ones that say yes will be all in. And then we'll go back to our old ways a little bit, and you'll remind them. And systems come in with it too. You can go look up plenty of resources through Orange or Grow or Growing Young, and many more, but where you can just, gosh, y'all's ministry is an amazing place for resources, but even on structure and systems. Craig Rochelle says systems are spiritual, solar systems, bodies are systems. Anyway, that go with it. But step one, get your leaders in a room and cash some vision with it. And that's where culture shift begins.
So good.
Powerful. It's amazing.
Joel, seriously, thanks so much
this is so valuable.
Just investing. Guys, I really loved about our time with you today. It's just like really practical things to implement and grow in. Joel, before we close, do you have any last minute thoughts, any things that you would love to share, talk about when it comes down to just building an effective youth ministry that you could touch on real quick?
Last thing I'll say is, so when you cast vision to leaders, that's one way. When we do it to students, like when we're now casting vision to students, our 4 words are simple, authentic, accessible, and fun. Simple, authentic, accessible, and fun. So we don't write a message without that. We don't, and nothing. Simple, authentic, which I wish I had another hour to just talk about the importance of authenticity with this generation, but that's fine. Accessibility, or accessible, and fun. That is, at least for this generation, that's their language. So when it moves into vision for them, that's what I would say. So other than that, if you have questions, and especially if you're at a multi-site church, I love to chat student ministry. So hit me up anytime and we'll talk student ministry. I didn't get to mention this, but every student ministry, every student pastor is playing cards, right? Like, you're playing poker. You've been dealt a hand that's your cultural context and your city and your church's culture and the staff or volunteers you have. And so there is no book out there on student ministry. It is a different situation for every single person. So for yours, find some people at least with a similar hand and learn from them. That's what I would say.
That's
Wow,
so
that's
great.
so good.
Joel, we're so grateful for you. And what's your Instagram that they can follow you and your journey in youth ministry and also shoot you some questions if they have them?
And come to camp, right?
Yeah, y'all want to come to camp? Come on. My Instagram is first underscore last name. So Joel, Joel underscore Firebaugh, Firebaugh. It's my real last name. And honestly, DM me if you want either some of this data I shared or to talk student ministry. Would love to.
Awesome. Well, Joel, thank you so much for your time. Can we pray over you real quick?
I would love that.
The last thing I wanted to mention too, real quick, for those of you watching, and you're thinking, okay, this was so great. I just wish my youth pastor was on, or this is so great, but I wish my pastor heard this to realize how much work I actually have to do as a 10-hour-a-week youth pastor, right? Or I just wish that I could share this with my entire multi-site team of youth pastors. If that's true, on Monday, this recording will be live for you to share. And so you can come back and have the link to be able to share this with your team. Where can they go to find that?
Yeah, exponential.org. Also, if you are going to be in Nashville, end of this month, April 25th,
next week,
26th,
on Monday,
you guys are welcome to come to our regional event. You can find more at exponential.org/events. We would love to see you there. But Joel, we're going to pray over you real quick. Super thankful for your time, man. Appreciate everything you're doing in this world. So God, thank you so much for Joel. Thank you for his life and his leadership. And God, I just thank you that he's building out leaders for a beautiful legacy that looks like you, leads like you, loves like you. And so God, I ask right now for Joel and his leadership and his team. I pray that you'll just fill them up. If there's any people feeling empty or low, God, I pray that you'll just fill up their cup. I pray that you'll give them joy in the moment, give them peace through their struggles. And God, I pray that you'll just bring favor upon Joel and his ministry that he's building. God, we love you so much. We thank you for this time. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
All right. Thank you, Joel. Have a great day, man.
So good to
Thanks,
see you guys.
Bye.
See you next Thursday.
Bye.